Okay, the Avengers. There's three things wrong with this movie. Number one, Captain America's costume. I really liked the one he had in the Captain America movie. It looked just like a repurposed military uniform. It was simple, but pretty badass, and I thought it looked great. They changed it for this one. Didn't like it when I saw the trailers, didn't like it in the movie. The new costume just looks rubbery and fake. I mean, the helmet is awful. I mean, it looks like he's got a big blue condom on his head. I don't know what they were going for, but it didn't work for me. It just looked really silly. Number two, the musical score. Very disappointing. It's not bad or intrusive or anything, but for the most part, the music is pretty forgettable and generic, which is a problem a lot of these Marvel movies seem to have. I mean, there's nothing iconic or memorable about it. Yeah, I was really hoping for more out of this. I mean, the best scores are the ones that you can hum to yourself as you leave the theater, and except for one part, this one really isn't like that at all. And number three, the worst offender in all this, nobody said Avengers Assemble. I kept waiting for it. Up until the last frame of the movie, I was waiting for somebody to say it. Cap, Nick Fury, anyone, but I never got it. How can you have an Avengers movie and not have their catchphrase in there? How can you not have Avengers Assemble? That was a huge glaring omission. So those were the gripes I had. However, as for the rest of this movie, holy shit. Considering how Marvel had spent several years setting this up across multiple movies, I don't think they could have asked for better results. This movie rocks. Thank God they got Joss Whedon for this, because they needed someone like him who knows how to handle multiple storylines and multiple characters simultaneously, and considering how many balls they had in the air with the various characters and story threads and stuff, that must have been a monstrously difficult balancing act. But Whedon pulls it off. Though for the record, I do strongly recommend you see those other Marvel movies first if you haven't seen them yet before you see this one, because it does kind of assume that you've seen them, and the MacGuffin Cube from Thor and Captain America is a big plot point. But even if you haven't seen those other movies, if you're a Whedon fan, you'll enjoy the hell out of this, because his style is in full effect here. Drama mixed with comedy, you'll laugh at the most unexpected times, and you might cry a few seconds later. I mean, there were moments when the audience was just howling with laughter. And also, there was a woman in my theater who was actually sobbing during one scene. I mean, I could hear her crying all the way in the back. I'm not even going to bother discussing the acting. I don't think any of us were worried about that part. These actors have all been extremely well cast. They all know their characters, and more importantly, Joss Whedon knows their characters. The performances are all top-notch. But if I had to pick one favorite, Tom Hiddleston as Loki pretty much steals every scene he's in. I mean, he's tremendous. Everyone gets a moment to shine, even minor characters like Maria Hill and Coulson. Everybody gets developed. Hawkeye and Thor do kind of get the short end of the stick in that department, but with a cast of characters this large, that was probably unavoidable. The story is as tight as I imagine it could have been. I mean, it had to be something that was going to bring all these disparate characters together, and rounding them all up does pretty much comprise the entire first act. Then in the second act, you see them observing the classic Marvel trope of the heroes fight and then they team up. And then in the third act, the shit hits the fan like you wouldn't believe, and they save the world. That must have been insanely tough to pull off, especially when you're dealing with all the various subplots and characters of the other Marvel movies. And yeah, Whedon somehow manages to touch on those too. And Pepper Potts has a few scenes. Stellan Skarsgård's character from Thor actually plays an important role. Natalie Portman's not in it, but Jane Foster's status is addressed, albeit briefly. Whedon knows these characters so well, and the fact that he was able to touch on all these different things while not having them infringe on the main story was so impressive. And all the while dealing with some of the most iconic characters in the Marvel Universe. And this is literally the best some of them have been written in the movies so far. Scarlet Witch is nicely fleshed out, Nick Fury gets some real development, and we finally get the sense that this is not just the guy who runs S.H.I.E.L.D. He can be a manipulative, ruthless SOB, which was never really touched on until now, but they finally start to explore that part of Fury's character, and it's really fun to see Sam Jackson getting to play that. He hasn't been this badass in a long time. Now, the only downside here is that they're juggling so many different things at once that they do have to take one or two narrative shortcuts in order to fit everything in story-wise. Specifically, how Thor is able to return to Earth is pretty much glossed over and dismissed with one line, and that did bug me a little bit, but the rest of the movie is so good that you really don't have a chance to dwell on these things at all. So the story and the characters are top-notch. I don't think the action is quite on the same level, though. And don't get me wrong, for the most part, the action is pretty good to really good, but it doesn't feel like anything we haven't seen before. That is, until the third act. Whedon takes his time, being patient, setting up a lot of these characters and set pieces, so much so that there really isn't as much action in the first two acts as you might think. But when Act 3 starts, all hell breaks loose. You start getting the payoffs for all these things that he set up, and damned if these aren't some of the most satisfying action sequences in any Marvel movie to date. And whatever you do, be sure you stay until the very end. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but that end credits stinger, there's actually two of them, and they're both really awesome. But the second one, pure genius. Bravo, Joss Whedon. I mean, despite a few nitpicks that I have, this really was best case scenario. This was the Avengers movie we've been waiting for. It really is hard to imagine how this could have turned out any better. I mean, I could go on and on about how awesome this movie is, but I don't think I need to. I've talked enough. Stop watching this video. Go see the movie. Until next time, guys, Avengers, assemble!